Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation's LNTV. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. Today we're joined by Liberty Nation's Tim Donner. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Mark. Good to be here.
Now, there's a lot of things I want to cover today, especially how Trump's position is looking coming into the November election in the wake of the COVID pandemic. Now, Tim, voters will certainly be going to the polls looking at their pocketbooks and their bank balances. And even if the economy is on a clear rebound, which some people are starting to suggest, do you expect the voters to be holding President Trump overly accountable for his actions during this crisis?
Well, I think the trajectory of the economy on November 3rd will be the most important thing. But there's still going to be a lot of pain and suffering and job loss. It's still fresh come early November. So I think it's a matter of whether voters will be looking for someone to credit or someone to blame. But if we've lost 40 million jobs, we had 5% minus negative economic growth in the last quarter. I mean, there's big promises from the president that we're going to have a roaring third and fourth quarter, but we don't know that. So what I'm saying is the Trump campaign has to be very careful about the idea that no matter how hapless Joe Biden might be, sometimes people go to the booth and just look for someone to blame. And if conditions are not on the upswing in November, I think Trump's got a serious problem on his hands.
That's an interesting perspective, especially as what you talked about here is not so much the COVID or the coronavirus, because in the grand scheme of things, terribly sad though every single loss of life is. If we compare it to, for example, the Hong Kong flu in the late 60s, I think 68, the death toll is still well below that. But what you mentioned just there was the effects of really the lockdown. It's the economic effects and the job losses. And in your article on libertynation.com, you say that there's now hard data coming in regarding the efficacy of the lockdowns and whether it was a smart choice in terms of the fatality rate. What's the data telling you?
Well, there's a couple of things that I think are particularly relevant. The CDC, for the first time, has released an estimated death rate. And unlike the 3.4% that was predicted by the World Health Organization in early March, it turns out that it's actually about 1/13 of that, which is about 0.26%. But if you take away the nursing home deaths, which account for more than half the deaths in this country, the fatality rate is exactly the same as most seasonal flus, 0.1%. So the question is then, well, what about the lockdown itself? Was it necessary? Did we go too far? Did we not go far enough? And the problem is that 3 countries in particular that chose not to lock down, and there's very few of them, but Sweden, Taiwan, and Ethiopia, all very different countries. None of them locked down, and all of them had impressive fatality rates. For example, Taiwan's fatality rate is 1/800th of the United States. Ethiopia's microscopic, it's 4/100ths of 1%. So there's not compelling evidence that this lockdown was worth it. And the question is whether the voters will conclude that, and whether they like their governors or not. They're going to blame the person at the top because the buck stops in the Oval Office, as Harry Truman said, as I repeated in my article. And I think that's a legitimate concern if economic conditions have not improved significantly like the president is predicting.
That's very true. It seems that it's almost certainly going to be a choice between Joe Biden and Donald Trump in November. I mean, do you have any idea what the polling's saying right now in relation to that?
Well, Joe Biden's ahead in almost every poll, including what was notable, the Fox News poll had him 8 points ahead of Trump. What's staggering, really, Mark, and this points to the whole thing about whether it was Trump's fault or not, about the virus, the response, the lockdown, too much, too little. The fact is that the latest Rasmussen poll, and their famous for their accuracy. They were the only ones that predicted the 2016 election essentially correctly. They showed that voters in their poll actually trust Joe Biden more on the economy and on handling the coronavirus. And I think that you can look at it one of two ways, that Trump's in deep trouble, or that it's so early. Biden's been on his own lockdown for 2 months, and once he comes out, Trump will obliterate him. But the point is that at this juncture, people are inclined to say, I'm just not sure. Let's see what happens between here and November, because people aren't going to vote on what it's like here in late May. They're going to vote on what it's like in November.
Tim, a bit of a speculative question, if I may. If you were advising the Trump campaign team on how to deal with what is at present looks to be a recession, and fingers crossed not a depression, what roadmap would you lay out coming up to November?
Well, I think the roadmap to lay out, if I was running the Trump campaign, essentially on the economy, which is going to be the issue, assuming there's no second wave of this virus that hits and starts killing tens of thousands of people. What I would do is say, look, I took a not moribund, but stagnant economy, and I built it to a point of greatness, zero unemployment, 2.5%, 3%, maybe 3.5% growth over the years. I did it once, I can do it again. And that's a good message for right now, Mark, because whether the economy gets better or worse, that's a message that has durability, I think, going through to November.
All right, thank you ever so much for your insight, Tim. And I recommend everybody head over to libertynation.com to check out this most recent article. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Mark.
Go deeper on the topic discussed in this video, head on over to one of these links here or go to our Liberty Nation Roku channel. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for Liberty.